a report just released by the United Nations Development Programme finding that the recent military escalation in the Middle East is causing ripple effects in Asia-Pacific households and economies. An estimated 8.8 million people are at risk of falling into poverty. The most immediate pain points: rising fuel and freight costs, resulting in lower purchasing powers, food insecurity as well as weakened livelihoods. And this report projects the conflict could wipe off up to $299 billion from the region's GDP as governments strain to cushion rising costs. And to help us unpack the report, Kanni Wignaraja is here with us. She's the Assistant Secretary General at the United Nations and Regional Director for Asia and the Pacific at UN Development Programme. Fantastic to meet you, Ms. Wignaraja. Now, your report says that Asia Pacific could lose up to $299 billion from this shock. Why is this now a direct Asia Pacific story, not just a Middle East one?
I think, Yasmin, we're seeing such a rapid transmission of the shocks carried mostly by fuel and freight charges into the region, because about 90% of crude oil and LNG that travels through the Straits of Hormuz actually head towards Asia and the Pacific. So it's an immediate transmission, and it's like setting a forest fire ablaze, and we're seeing the immediate shocks with the rise in prices on fuel, food, and fertilizer across the region. We've looked at about 36 countries, and all of them, to varying degrees, are showing shocks, and some adapting fast. That's when you see a lesser simulated loss on the economy. But if for those that are not, that's where you see the upper end of a loss of about $299 billion just in this immediate period.
Okay, so that's the upper end figure that you've quoted. And you mentioned energy there. You've identified that as the main transmission channel. When it comes to soaring prices, with poorer households across Asia already exposed to inflation and weak purchasing power, how fast is this latest shock feeding through to them?
We have some countries in the region. I mean, if I look at countries like China that have significant reserve stocks of oil. And so they're able to cushion and buffer the transmission of this shock through stabilizing prices. What other countries are doing in the region is that they're trying to reduce and absorb the cost themselves. And so they've called on emergency measures so that poor households don't feel the immediacy of this. And, in most of our countries in Asia Pacific, the poorer households spend about 30% on the lower end of their income on food. So if you look at that and the cost of fertilizer, which unfortunately, again, in our region is very heavily fossil fuel based fertilizer, poorer households are seeing the harshest impact of this. That's why the poverty figures can be all the way up to 8.8 million people being pushed into poverty. And the most vulnerable are the low-income households, which are on the lower end of the job skills market as well. So one drop in percentage of GDP is 2 percentage points drop in the lower skill unemployment rates. You see those going up very, very fast already.
Yeah, no doubt the knock-on effects of that would be dire. I must zoom in on Iran. In that country alone, your report finds that more than 5 million people are at risk of falling into poverty. How serious is that deterioration now?
So Iran was one of the countries which you saw an increasing rate of human development over the last years, and a growing middle class. With this shock, which is obviously the highest hit in our region, is on Iran directly. you're seeing that drop, not because of oil price, because they've got enough cushioning there that helps, but because they import food, fertilizer, and because of the destruction inside Iran on essential services, including health, education, and water. So that's where you're seeing the big hit with the direct impact of war on Iran's poorer, vulnerable communities. So it's about the upper end estimate on poverty is indeed that about 5 million people will suffer. Now, Iran's putting in a lot of cushioning effects as well to try and help and immediately try and provide relief to these people because it's going to take a while, though, to come out of the longer term impact of the war on Iran.
Yeah, I must add as well that your report says Iran could lose up to 1.5 years of human development progress, which of course is quite regrettable. And you worry about the future when you see, durations like that. But like you mentioned, their government trying to help across the region as well, Ms. Wignaraja. Governments are responding, subsidies, price stabilization, energy saving measures, and all that being, put in. How difficult are the trade-offs becoming between stabilizing prices and protecting spending on other social essentials for governments in Asia Pacific?
When we look across the board, the shorter term adjustments have to do with price stabilization and emergency measures on tax relief, basic income support. So quickly adjusting targeted social protection, for example. What's more difficult, but which is absolutely key, is for countries in our region to be more energy secure and therefore move to a renewable mix of energy, not just energy efficiency, which is critical, but to get in that mix of energy. So if I look at countries like China, which only something like 18.5% of its total energy use is oil. Now, we do see countries like Vietnam also moving in that direction, and many others. Harder to do in the short term, but I think that energy security mix, and the same goes for fertilizer, by the way, or food. Look at the Pacific Islands. Some of those islands, close to 95% of food is imported. This is not sustainable. And not from only a development point of view, but also from a security point of view. So I'm hoping that the lessons we learned from COVID also transmits through this, and we can see that mix coming in on food, fertilizer, and fuel to a cleaner, but also more secure mix in the future.
All right. And looking ahead, what should governments prioritize now, especially on energy and food security, to stop this becoming a longer-term development setback?
I think the immediate is indeed trying to increase the buffer stocks, the reserves, because this is essential until they move towards that mix. So if I look at a Korea or a Republic of Korea or Japan, China, these countries have significant stocks. India has good stocks. These are countries that can adjust faster. But the others do have to put in more reserves where they can afford it. But otherwise, the quicker adjustment to a better energy mix, to looking at reducing dependency on high-cost food items, and certainly looking at fertilizer, like some of the countries using nano-fertilizer programs, for example, are critical. Now, the other area is that instead of these very extended trade and supply chain dependencies, which can get hit not just by wars and conflicts, but also by viruses. Many countries are looking to their sub-regions, closer, more circular economies within sub-regions. So you see ASEAN really trying to do that. So the dependency is closer in the neighborhood and isn't extended to the Middle East and beyond, to the extent that they are right now.
Yeah, that's right, Ms. Wignaraja. Makes lots of sense. So very quickly, what is one indicator that you will be watching most closely in the weeks ahead?
Well, for us as UNDP, for us, it's that human development indicator, which really is transmission of shocks to the poorest households and their ability to cope. So for us in all of these countries, our work will be working with governments to look at the cushioning effects with changes in policy that will protect the most vulnerable households. And that's what we will be following very, very closely and supporting in the weeks ahead.
Very good to talk with you, and thank you for explaining your report, Kanni Wignaraja, Assistant Secretary General at the United Nations and Regional Director for Asia and the Pacific at UN Development Programme. Have a great day.